Jake Morrison's garage smelled like burnt coffee, stale pizza, and the ozone tang of overheated electronics. At 2:17 in the morning, surrounded by a chaotic symphony of humming servers, blinking LED arrays, and the occasional spark from his jury-rigged radio telescope assembly, he felt like a mad scientist from a B-movie. The only thing missing was a hunchbacked assistant and a thunderstorm. "Igor, fetch me the oscilloscope," he muttered to himself, then immediately felt ridiculous. His neighbors already thought he was weird enough without adding theatrical soliloquies to his midnight routine. The targeting computer beeped insistently, demanding his attention. Jake rubbed his bloodshot eyes and squinted at the numbers scrolling across his salvaged monitor. 3 months of work, 4 maxed-out credit cards, and approximately 700 cups of coffee had led to this moment. His thesis advisor had laughed when Jake proposed sending a structured signal to Kepler 442b, calling it romantically naive, and suggesting he stick to analyzing existing data like a proper graduate student. "Romantically naive," Jake snorted, adjusting the primary dish angle with a wrench that had seen better decades. "We'll see who's romantic when I'm accepting my Nobel Prize in my Star Trek pajamas." The signal array hummed with barely contained power, drawing enough electricity to dim the streetlights on his block. Mrs. Henderson next door had already complained twice about her television flickering whenever Jake fired up his equipment. He'd promised to keep it down, but groundbreaking science waited for no one's evening soap operas. Jake's fingers danced across the keyboard, inputting the final coordinates. Kepler 442b hung in space roughly 1,200 light-years away, a tantalizing maybe Earth in the constellation Lyra. If his calculations were correct, and if his homemade equipment could punch a coherent signal through 1,200 light-years of cosmic background noise, he might just detect something magnificent. His phone buzzed, a text from his lab partner, "Still playing with your space radio, some of us have actual jobs tomorrow." "Some of us," Jake typed back, "are making history in our garages at 2 a.m. like proper mad scientists." The response came immediately. "Some of us are also clinically insane. Get some sleep." Jake set the phone aside and turned back to his equipment. The transmission sequence was loaded and ready. A simple mathematical progression followed by prime numbers, then a basic representation of hydrogen atoms, the universal greeting card of the cosmos, assuming anyone was listening. He dreamed about this moment for months, imagining alien scientists on some distant world receiving humanity's first intentional interstellar message. His finger hovered over the transmission button. Somewhere in the back of his sleep-deprived mind, a small voice suggested double-checking his coordinates. Jake ignored it. He'd run the calculations 3 times already, and besides, he was operating on 47 minutes of sleep and enough caffeine to kill a horse. What could possibly go wrong? He pressed the button. The garage filled with a bone-deep thrumming as his equipment channeled every available watt into a focused beam of radio waves. The lights dimmed, his computer monitor flickered, and somewhere in the distance, Mrs. Henderson's dog started howling. Jake watched the power meters climb toward their red zones, crossing his fingers that nothing would explode before the transmission completed. "Come on, baby," he whispered to his equipment. "Just hold together for 30 more seconds." 29, 28, 27. A transformer somewhere blew with a satisfying bang, plunging half the neighborhood into darkness. Jake's emergency battery system kicked in, bathing his garage in eerie red light as the transmission continued. Perfect. He was definitely getting another noise complaint. 15, 14, 13. His laptop chimed with an error message. Coordinate verification failed. Jake's stomach dropped. He lunged for the abort switch, but it was too late. The sequence completed with a final, thunderous pulse that rattled his garage door and set off 3 car alarms. "No, no, no," Jake muttered, frantically pulling up his targeting calculations. The numbers swam before his exhausted eyes, and slowly, horribly, his mistake became clear. He transposed 2 digits in the right ascension coordinates. Instead of aiming for Kepler 442b in the constellation Lyra, his signal had gone screaming off toward some uncharted patch of space near Draco. "Fantastic," he said to the darkness. "I just sent humanity's first interstellar message to absolutely nowhere. My thesis advisor is going to love this." Jake slumped in his chair, surrounded by the smell of fried electronics and his own spectacular failure. 1,200 light-years away, his carefully crafted message was hurtling through the void toward empty space, a cosmic equivalent of accidentally texting your ex when you meant to message your mom. He was still sitting there 20 minutes later when the power company's emergency truck arrived to fix the transformer he'd blown. The technician, a grizzled man named Earl who'd probably seen every variety of suburban electrical disaster, poked his head into the garage and whistled appreciatively at Jake's setup. "You running some kind of radio station out here, son?" "Something like that," Jake said weakly. "Well, whatever you're broadcasting, you just took out 3 city blocks. Might want to turn down the volume next time." After Earl left and the neighborhood lights flickered back to life, Jake spent another hour documenting his failure for posterity. His research journal, a battered notebook filled with coffee stains and increasingly desperate mathematical scribblings, received a new entry. Successfully wasted 3 months and $4,000 sending a message to empty space. Career prospects, grim. He was about to shut down his equipment and crawl into bed when something odd caught his attention. His electromagnetic field detector, a sensitive device he'd built to monitor cosmic background radiation, was registering unusual fluctuations. Subtle at first, barely above the noise floor but growing stronger. "That's weird," Jake muttered, adjusting the sensitivity. The readings spiked, settled, then spiked again in a regular pattern, almost like a heartbeat. Over the next 3 days, the anomalies grew more pronounced. Jake's Wi-Fi started cutting out at random intervals. Street lights flickered whenever he walked beneath them. Mrs. Henderson's dog, a normally placid golden retriever named Buster, wouldn't stop howling at night. Even stranger, Jake's equipment detected organized patterns in the electromagnetic disturbances, mathematical sequences that seemed almost deliberately structured. "I'm losing my mind," he told his reflection while brushing his teeth on the 3rd morning. 3 days of no sleep and too much caffeine, and now I'm seeing alien signals in random radio noise. But the patterns persisted, growing stronger each night. By Thursday evening, Jake's garage had become the epicenter of electromagnetic chaos. His laptop screen flickered constantly, his digital clocks reset themselves every few hours, and his microwave had started playing what sounded suspiciously like classical music backwards whenever he tried to heat up leftover pizza. Jake was hunched over his computer, trying to decode the latest batch of signals, when the sky exploded. A brilliant streak of light tore across the darkness, moving far too fast and far too controlled to be a meteor. Jake stumbled out of his garage just in time to see the object, whatever it was, adjust its trajectory with impossible precision, and slam into his backyard with a sound like thunder wrapped in velvet. The impact crater was perfectly circular, about 6 feet across, and glowing with a soft blue light that pulsed in rhythm with those mysterious electromagnetic signals. Steam rose from the edges, carrying a scent Jake couldn't identify, ozone and copper and something else, something that made his neurons fire in ways that felt almost like recognition. "Okay," Jake said to the universe in general, "this is either the best day of my life or the last day of my life, and honestly, I'm not sure which I'd prefer." From somewhere in the crater came the faint sound of what Jake could have sworn was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, played backwards and underwater. Jake stood at the edge of his backyard crater, clutching a baseball bat he'd grabbed from his garage and wearing his faded Star Trek pajamas, feeling like the universe's least prepared first contact ambassador. The blue glow pulsed hypnotically, and that backwards choppin' was definitely getting louder. He briefly considered calling someone, NASA, maybe, or the FBI, or possibly his therapist. But who exactly did you report a musical crater to? Hello? He called tentatively toward the glowing hole. Anyone down there need assistance? I've got a first aid kit, but it's probably not rated for interstellar travel injuries. The music stopped. The silence that followed was somehow more unnerving than the backwards classical had been. Jake tightened his grip on the bat, which he realized was about as useful against alien technology as a rubber chicken would be against a nuclear submarine. Movement in the crater made his heart skip several beats. A hand emerged first, pale, graceful, and definitely human-looking, though Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the proportions were just slightly off in ways his brain couldn't quite process. The hand was followed by an arm, then a shoulder, and finally a head crowned with dark hair that seemed to absorb the blue light rather than reflect it. The woman who climbed out of the crater moved like water flowing uphill, smooth, impossible, and mesmerizing. She was tall, maybe 5'8", with features that struck Jake as classically beautiful until she turned her head and he caught sight of her ears. They were distinctly pointed, elongated in an elegant curve that reminded him of fantasy art, but somehow more organic, more real. They caught the light from his porch lamp and threw it back in prismatic fragments that painted rainbow patterns across the crater's edge. "Greetings," she said, her voice carrying a musical quality that made Jake think of wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Her English was perfect, though tinged with an accent he couldn't place, something that suggested vast distances and cold spaces. "I received your invitation and have traveled quite far to answer your call." Jake stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish trying to process the concept of air. She was wearing what appeared to be a form-fitting bodysuit that shifted between deep purple and black, depending on how the light hit it, the material seeming to move independently of her body in subtle, hypnotic patterns. "My invitation," Jake managed, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "I think there's been some kind of mistake. I mean, I did send a signal into space, but that was an accident. I was trying to contact Kepler 442b. But I screwed up the coordinates in." "You sent a signal," she interrupted gently, tilting her head in a way that made those prismatic ears catch more light. "A quite lovely mathematical sequence, followed by your basic atomic structure, very poetic in its primitive way." Primitive? Jake felt a spark of indignation overcome his terror. Hey now, that was some sophisticated stuff. "Do you know how hard it is to build a coherent radio telescope array in a garage? I had to modify 17 different components and write my own targeting software." The woman smiled, revealing teeth that were perhaps a shade too white and just slightly too sharp. "Forgive me. Your technological limitations are charming. I particularly enjoyed how you managed to blow out several power transformers in the process. The electromagnetic chaos was quite dramatic. You were monitoring my transmission in real time." Jake lowered the baseball bat slightly, his scientific curiosity beginning to override his survival instincts. "That's impossible. Even if you were relatively close, the signal delay alone." "Distance," she said, stepping gracefully over the crater's edge, "is more of a suggestion than a rule once you understand how space-time actually behaves. Your species has some fascinating misconceptions about the nature of reality." Jake's smoke detector chose that moment to start beeping frantically from inside the house. He'd completely forgotten about the frozen dinner he'd thrown in the oven before coming outside to investigate the crater. The mundane sound of domestic disaster mixed with the surreal nature of his situation created a cognitive dissonance that made him laugh hysterically. "That's my dinner," he explained between giggles, feeling like he was losing his grip on sanity. "I'm having a close encounter of the third kind in my backyard, and my frozen lasagna is burning. This is either the best night of my life or I've, finally, had that complete mental breakdown my mother always warned me about." Your food is burning. The alien woman looked genuinely concerned. That seems wasteful. Your species doesn't have unlimited resources. No, we definitely don't, Jake agreed, heading toward his back door. You can come inside if you want. I mean, you've traveled across interstellar space to get here. The least I can do is offer you a drink. Fair warning, though. I've got diet soda, energy drinks, and beer that's probably expired. He held the door open for her, which felt absurdly polite under the circumstances. She paused at the threshold, those elongated ears twitching slightly, before stepping into his kitchen. Jake noticed she moved without making any sound at all, her feet seeming to barely touch the linoleum. The smoke detectors shrieking filled the house. Jake rushed to turn off the oven and pull out what had once been a perfectly good frozen dinner, and was now a smoldering brick of cheese and regret. Jake handed her the least expired beer from his refrigerator, noting how her fingers felt surprisingly cool against his when she took the bottle. He opened one for himself and took a long swig, hoping alcohol might make this conversation feel less like a prelude to his own obituary. "So," he said, settling back into his chair and trying to project an air of casual scientific inquiry rather than barely contained panic, space vampire. "That's a new one for me. I mean, I've read about theoretical xenobiology, but most of the papers focus on silicon-based life forms or methane-breathing organisms. Nobody ever mentioned energy-draining humanoids with excellent dental work." She laughed, a sound like silver bells mixed with distant thunder. "Your scientific literature is limited by your own biological perspective. You assume all life must follow the same patterns you observe on this world. My people, the Sci-Fi, evolved quite differently." "Sci-Fi," Jake repeated, rolling the syllables around his tongue. "Let me guess, you're from a planet with no sun." "Tidally locked world, actually. One side perpetual day, the other eternal night. We evolved in the twilight zone between the two, where the temperature was stable but the light was insufficient for traditional photosynthesis. So we developed alternative methods of energy acquisition." Jake leaned forward despite his better judgment. "That's fascinating. How does the energy transfer work? Is it electrical, chemical, some kind of quantum field manipulation?" "You're taking this remarkably well," she observed, tilting her head in that disconcerting way that made her ears catch the kitchen light. "Most species react with significantly more terror when I explain my feeding habits." "Oh, I'm terrified," Jake assured her. "I'm just also incredibly curious. It's a character flaw. My professors always said I'd get myself killed someday by asking too many questions. Turns out they might have been more prophetic than they realized. I find your curiosity refreshing. Most intelligent species become rather boring once they achieve interstellar travel. They lose that sense of wonder about the universe. But you," she studied him with those unsettling eyes, "you're genuinely excited to learn, even when the knowledge might be dangerous." "Knowledge is never dangerous," Jake said automatically, then caught himself. "Okay, that's not true. Nuclear physics is pretty dangerous. Genetic engineering can go sideways fast. And apparently radio astronomy can accidentally summon predatory aliens to your backyard. But the principle stands." She smiled at that, and Jake noticed her teeth weren't quite as sharp as he'd initially thought. Still pointed, but more subtle, like someone had filed down a shark's dentition to be socially acceptable at dinner parties. "Tell me about your world," Jake said, taking another sip of beer. "What's it like? The Nike's home planet, I mean." Nixthara. The name translates roughly to place between light and shadow. "Imagine your Earth, but one hemisphere locked in eternal sunset, the other in permanent dawn. We built our cities in the twilight band, great spiraling structures that reached into the upper atmosphere to catch what little solar radiation we could. And you developed space travel because you were looking for better energy sources." "Partially. Though we discovered that different species produce distinctly different flavors of life force, variety became important to us." Jake felt his stomach flip again. Flavors. Right. So I'm basically sitting here discussing cuisine with someone who considers me a potential entree. You would be quite flavorful, actually, she said thoughtfully, causing Jake to nearly choke on his beer. There's something about your particular mixture of intelligence and terror that would be quite appetizing. Your emotional state is remarkably complex. Thanks, I think. Though I have to ask, is this whole conversation just you playing with your food? If I intended to feed on you, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I would have drained you the moment I emerged from that crater. She paused, considering. Though I admit, the temptation is growing stronger. It has been quite some time since my last meal. Jake set down his beer with hands that were definitely not shaking. Thank you very much. How long exactly? In your time units, approximately 3 months. The journey here required entering a form of hibernation to conserve energy, but now that I'm awake. She trailed off, and Jake noticed her elongated ears had begun to glow faintly around the edges. 3 months without eating. That's got to be tough. I get cranky if I skip lunch. The hunger is significant. Your species produces such rich bioelectric fields, and there are so many of you. The abundance is almost overwhelming. Overwhelming in a good way, or I might accidentally drain the entire neighborhood way. That depends largely on my self-control, which tends to diminish proportionally with my hunger levels. Jake stood up abruptly, pacing to his kitchen window and peering out at Mrs. Henderson's house. Her porch light was on, and he could see the blue flicker of her television through her living room window. The thought of that sweet old lady becoming alien vampire food made his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't quite name. There has to be another way, he said, turning back to face her. Some alternative food source. I mean, you've got incredibly advanced technology, faster than light travel, energy manipulation, probably matter conversion. Can't you synthesize what you need? We tried centuries ago. Artificial life force lacks the complexity, the emotional resonance that makes feeding truly nourishing. It's like comparing a photograph of food to an actual meal. Technically similar, but missing essential qualities. What about animals? Do they have the right kind of life force? They do, but it's unsatisfying, like subsisting entirely on bland nutrient paste. Functional, but hardly pleasant. Intelligent species provide much richer sustenance. Jake ran his hands through his hair, feeling like he was trying to solve an ethical trolley problem with cosmic implications. So you need to feed on intelligent beings to survive, but feeding on intelligent beings is basically murder. Not necessarily murder. A careful feeding leaves the host drained but alive, weakened for a few days, perhaps slightly anemic, but ultimately unharmed. It's the difference between taking a pint of blood for medical purposes and completely exsanguinating someone. But you said it could be fatal. If one feeds too greedily, yes. Or if the host is already weakened. Or if one simply doesn't care about their survival. She paused, those glowing ears twitching slightly. I should mention that my people don't generally concern themselves with the welfare of food sources. But you do. You intrigue me, Jake Morrison. Your species is young, curious, resilient. You sent a signal into space not out of desperation or aggression, but simply because you wanted to see if anyone was listening. That kind of innocent curiosity is refreshing. Most civilizations we encounter have either grown paranoid and insular, or they've become predatory themselves. Jake felt a surge of hope. So you're not going to drain me dry and move on to my neighbors. I'm considering my options. She moved to his kitchen window, gazing out at the suburban street beyond. Your world is beautiful in its own primitive way. 7 billion potential food sources, most of them completely unaware of the wider universe. It would be like discovering an untouched buffet. The hope died as quickly as it had formed. Right, of course. Jake spent the next 48 hours in a state of caffeinated panic, hunched over his computer while Lyra lay. She'd finally told him her name, monitored the energy signatures building around his house. The readings were getting stronger by the hour, painting rainbow patterns across his electromagnetic sensors that would have been beautiful if they weren't essentially a dinner bell for cosmic predators. "This is insane," Jake muttered, scrolling through pages of hastily scribbled calculations. "I'm trying to save Earth using garage-built equipment and Wikipedia articles about faster-than-light communication theory. This is like trying to perform brain surgery with a butter knife and a YouTube tutorial. Your equipment is more sophisticated than you give it credit for," Lyreley said from her position by his kitchen window, where she'd been keeping watch for the past 6 hours. "Primitive by Nike's high standards, but remarkably ingenious given your technological limitations. Thanks for the backhanded compliment. Very encouraging while I'm trying to prevent the extinction of my species." She turned from the window, those prismatic ears catching the late afternoon sunlight. "You've been working for 2 days straight. Your bioelectric field is becoming erratic from exhaustion." "Yeah, well, impending alien invasion tends to interfere with my sleep schedule." Jake rubbed his eyes and took another swig of energy drink. "Though I have to ask, how exactly does my bioelectric field look right now?" Asking for a friend who's concerned about being accidentally drained by a hungry space vampire. "Frayed around the edges, but still quite vibrant. Your determination is actually enhancing the flavor profile considerably." "I'm not sure whether to be flattered or terrified that I'm apparently aging like a fine wine. Both would be appropriate." Jake's sensor array chimed with an alert that made his heart skip. 3 new energy signatures had just appeared at the edge of his detection range, moving fast and heading directly toward Earth. "We've got company," he announced unnecessarily, since Lyreley had already stiffened like a hunting dog catching a scent. 3 signatures," she confirmed, her voice taking on a new tension. "A standard hunting pack. They'll arrive within 6 hours. 6 hours to save the world. No pressure." Jake's fingers flew across his keyboard, implementing the desperate plan they'd cobbled together over the past 2 days. "Tell me again why this is going to work." "Because you're going to convince them that your world is already claimed territory, unsuitable for feeding." "Right. And I'm going to do this by broadcasting a fake signal that makes Earth look like a dead planet with a malfunctioning automated beacon." "Essentially, yes. Using my garage equipment that I've now modified with alien technology I don't understand, to create a deception sophisticated enough to fool beings who have been traveling the galaxy for millennia." "Your lack of confidence is showing." Jake laughed hysterically. "My lack of confidence? I'm a graduate student in radio astronomy who accidentally summoned aliens while trying to write a thesis. Overconfidence would be clinically insane at this point." Lyreley moved away from the window and knelt beside his chair, placing one cool hand on his shoulder. "Jake, you contacted my species across 1,200 light-years using equipment you built yourself. You've adapted Nike's high-energy manipulation technology to your primitive systems in less than 48 hours. You're far more capable than you realize. I'm also apparently about to broadcast the galactic equivalent of nothing to see here. Move along to 3 hungry aliens who could drain my entire neighborhood like juice boxes." "The signal needs to be perfect," she said seriously. "If they detect any deception, they'll investigate more thoroughly, and if they discover that you're here helping me, they'll kill us both. Yeah, you mentioned that part." Jake's hands were shaking slightly as he made the final adjustments to his transmitter array. The modifications Lyreley had helped him implement were beyond anything he'd dreamed possible. Quantum entanglement relays, subspace frequency modulators, technology that shouldn't have been possible with his budget and skill level. Working with her had been like trying to perform surgery while someone guided his hands with incomprehensible precision. "Broadcasting in 30 seconds, he announced, his finger hovering over the transmission key. Cross your fingers that 3 months of failed experiments have somehow prepared me for this moment. Nike's don't have fingers, Lyreley pointed out, but I'll cross my ears if that helps. Despite everything, Jake grinned. That's probably the weirdest good luck charm in human history, but I'll take it. He pressed the key. The signal that erupted from his equipment was unlike anything he'd transmitted before. Instead of his usual clean mathematical sequences, this broadcast was deliberately chaotic, random noise punctuated by fragmentary data bursts that painted a picture of a civilization long dead. Ancient automated systems still functioning but slowly degrading, broadcasting meaningless information to a universe that had moved on millennia ago. Phase 1 complete, Jake said, monitoring the power levels. Now we wait to see if they buy it. They didn't have to wait long. The 3 energy signatures slowed as they approached Earth's solar system, holding position just beyond Pluto's orbit. Jake watched his sensors track their movements, 3 predators circling what they hoped looked like carrion. They're scanning, Lyreley reported, her elongated ears glowing brightly as she somehow monitored communications Jake's equipment couldn't detect. Standard orbital reconnaissance. They're analyzing your planet's energy signatures. And finding absolutely nothing interesting, I hope. The deception is holding. They're reading your world as energetically depleted, a few scattered automated systems, but no significant life signs. Jake held his breath as minutes ticked by. His improvised signal continued broadcasting its tale of cosmic abandonment, while 3 alien hunters decided whether Earth was worth investigating further. They're moving, Lyreley announced suddenly. Jake's heart stopped, toward us. Away. The pack leader is convinced this system is a dead end. They're resuming course toward the Centauri cluster. Jake slumped back in his chair, feeling like he'd just run a marathon while juggling lit dynamite. We did it. We actually did it. You did it, Lyreley corrected. Your deception was flawless. Even I would have been convinced by that signal. I had a good teacher. Jake looked at her, this beautiful alien predator who had somehow become his unlikely partner in saving his species. So what happens now? Lyreley was quiet for a long moment, those strange ears dimming as whatever communication link she'd been monitoring faded. Now I face a choice I never expected to confront. What kind of choice? Whether to return to the stars with my people or remain here with you. Jake felt his breath catch. You want to stay on Earth. My species has wandered the galaxy for millennia, always hunting, always moving, never forming attachments to the places we visit or the beings we encounter. But you, she gestured toward his improvised laboratory, his jury-rigged equipment, his walls covered with astronomical charts and half-finished calculations. You've shown me something I'd forgotten existed. What's that? Wonder, curiosity without predation, the joy of discovery for its own sake. She moved to his window again, gazing out at the suburban street where Mrs. Henderson was walking her dog and teenagers were playing basketball in a driveway. Your species is young and flawed and absolutely fascinating. I want to learn about your world, not consume it. But you still need to feed, Jake pointed out. That's not going to change. No, it won't, but perhaps we can find a way to manage that ethically. Small amounts from willing volunteers, carefully controlled to ensure no harm comes to the host. Your medical professionals do something similar with blood donation. Jake blinked. You want to set up a life force donation program. Stranger things have happened.